Howdy, my friends. Today, I want to talk about. Well, I want to do a little bit of a, I guess, a kind of a rebuttal, or I guess you could say it's my to share some of my thoughts on a video someone sent me. I often, quite often, pretty much weekly, I get videos sent to me, or podcasts and things of that nature, articles from different clients and different fans of my work, and they'll say, "What do you think about this?" Or usually they're really anxious. They'll say, "Oh my God, I just heard this podcast, or I read this article, or this coach said this, and I'm so worried it's going to impact me. What if this is my story?" And today, this one came from someone that said they heard a podcast from a pretty well-known guy in the Benzo community, and that it triggered her. And she said, this guy's like 8 years out, and he's having these major setbacks, and it just rattled me. And Dave, will you listen to it? What are your thoughts on this? Now, I'm kind of a loved or hated. I don't know if you say hated, but people either like me or they don't in this community. And one reason for that is because I don't completely agree with a lot of the stuff I see as far as setbacks go, and all the benzo boogeymen and things of that nature. Not that I don't think these things aren't real, but I think the reports are often drastically over exaggerated or misinterpreted. What's the saying? When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, right? Or especially unicorns. And that's all I'm saying. When I hear hoofbeats, I think horses, right? It's Occam's razors. What's the obvious answer? It's probably the likely answer. So I went back and I listened to this video, which comes from, I believe his name was D.E. Foster, with the Benzo Free channel. He has a Benzo Free podcast. And this video, I think he just released it yesterday, February 3rd. It's called Our Mailbag, Insomnia, Alcohol, Tinnitus, and Bind. So this is just him sort of going down the list and answering questions, something I've done myself, which is very helpful. And first, let me say, I've listened to this video, a good portion of it anyway, and he seems like a really nice guy. I don't think him and I have ever spoken. I'm not sure. His name does sound familiar to me, but he's very well spoken. He's got a lot of great tips, and I applaud him for his work in the benzo community for sure. I think we need more brave people out there who can handle this work, who can, share tips and advice and do this, especially people on the other side of it, because this thing is traumatizing, guys. And when you finally are free of this, it's the last damn thing you want is to come back and be a benzo warrior, to be in this community. I mean, it's like getting out of Alcatraz after, a long stint for a crime you never committed. I mean, once you're on the other side, you just want to bolt like a horse and get the hell out of there. Don't look back. So I applaud Foster for his work. I applaud all coaches for their work, even the ones I don't completely agree with some of their methods or some of their interpretations. I still think they're kind of heroes on the front line. So let me say that. Now, like I said, I was asked to kind of do a rebuttal to share my thoughts on this, and I'm starting to want to do this a little bit more because I'm noticing there's a lot of stuff out there that is triggering, and I want to kind of address it instead of just addressing it in the 50 emails I get or comments, that maybe just put out a video here and there and say, well, here's my thoughts on this. So without further ado, and that long-winded introduction, so here's my interpretation. The first several minutes of the podcast here with Foster, he's pretty much outlining that he thinks he's in a setback. I hope I frame this right, that he believes he's in a setback. He's several years removed from benzos. He's talking about bind and COVID. Well, the first thing I noticed, and even when this person reached out to me, regarding this trigger, I said, look, I don't know this person. I don't know their story. I don't know any of the details of what you're telling me, but I can already tell you with a really high level of confidence, there's probably more to the story than, John Doe woke up after 8 years one day and suddenly his nervous system crashed and he's back in benzo. He's back at, stage 1 of benzo recovery, right? Because first off, our nervous system doesn't work that way. Nothing in our body works that way. Nothing can be built up. It's like going to the gym, you build up a muscle, and then one day you wake up and the muscle's gone. You know, it doesn't happen. The brain doesn't form thousands and thousands of, not thousands, millions of, synapses and new receptors. And I mean, the problem with talking about this stuff is there's so much neurology, there's so much anatomy and physiology to be understood. And even I don't understand it. I don't presume to be some, MIT neurobiologist. I have a pretty strong understanding of it, but, I'm not a neurologist. So I put that up there, right up front. Not claiming to be an expert here necessarily, but I've been humbled. I've seen enough to know, even with what I do know, I'm humbled to say, wow, there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot of other interpretations. There's a lot of other explanations, but I do know enough to tell you that, at a base level, it's really easy to draw associations to things, and then believe that and be really cemented on this must be that. And it's especially so when you start to have other people in the community reiterating the same stuff. And we have terms like bind, and there's just so much now, so many seeds have been planted and so many overlap that we just start to accept it. And there's also a part of this where it's kind of us against them, right? It's the benzo wounded. We're the lightened ones. We're the ones that know the truth. And then there's the dumb doctors. And I agree with that to a point. Don't get me wrong. I really do. I mean, this thing is under the radar. The psychiatrists are hurting people. They don't know what the hell they're doing. In terms of benzos, they're ripping people off, they're gaslighting, they're denying things. So there's a good argument for all this. I understand where the attitude, where all the attitude comes from, and the anger and the frustration and all of it. I get it. But we have to step back. I implore you, be a scientist. Ask yourself, is there other explanations here? Right? So again, getting back to Foster's situation here with himself, I don't know all the details. I don't want to speculate and sound like someone that's talking out of place here, but I'm listening to the podcast, and within several minutes he's talking about having COVID 3 times, and as recent as December, right, which was just a couple months ago. And this is someone that's several years out, and then I'm listening to him, and he's talking about having trouble swallowing and some of these symptoms, which immediately I go, well, that's air hunger. Anybody with anxiety can develop air hunger. And a lot of you will say, well, I never had air hunger before. Well, anxieties manifest, they grow, right? Things change. I mean, I've seen people, many, many, many people with air hunger that never taken a benzo. And they said the same thing. I never had this problem before. Well, now you do. I mean, I know it's not the answer you want to hear, but now you do. Maybe you had anxiety. Oh, I had anxiety since I was a kid. And then now suddenly at 40, I'm having trouble swallowing. What's going on? I'm having shortness of breath. I'm having the tingles and a surging, which we call hypoarousal activity in my body, a sort of trauma response, an overload on the limbic system. It happens, guys. Things can build. Now, I'm not discrediting anything. Just hear me. All I'm doing is this kind of providing an alternative to the explanation. Let's put it that way. So 3 times with COVID, he says I've had issues with my stomach and reflux issues. I went and had all these very invasive tests done. They found nothing. They said, oh, there's a little bit of reflux issue in your throat maybe. And like I said, he accredits, well, I've had stomach issues and I've dealt with this kind of thing long before benzo. I'm sure benzos doesn't help the stomach, right? I mean, have you ever met anybody who has an anxiety disorder who doesn't have stomach issues? Very rare. I mean, the two are, you got to wonder the causality and the correlation there. The stomach problems cause anxiety. Does anxiety cause stomach problems? What's the overlap? Does it have something to do with the second mini brain in the stomach and the production of neurotransmitters in the stomach? Who knows? Who knows yet? We don't completely know. I suspect there's a lot of overlap, and I suspect that anxiety, the production of cortisol and stress changes the biome and the gut health in the stomach, and then these things can manifest. And then as they manifest, symptoms increase of health anxiety grows, increases of cortisol, norepinephrine, suppression of GABA, suppression of serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine. There's a physiology at play here, right? And then it starts to become recorded in the limbic system. Now we're having trauma responses, these roads sort of leading from the limbic system out to the trigger, stomach issues. And at the core of it, now there's benzo, this big bad wolf of a boogeyman, right? It's benzos. What is this thing? It's like this mysterious phantom. It can manifest in anything. Be careful. Don't take oregano. It's GABAergic, and hot water can, and it's, and again, and I'm not discrediting these things, because sometimes I think you guys hear me wrong, that like Dave just doesn't believe this. No, I do believe. Listen, I mean, it's well documented, the side effects of most meds. 3,000 people in America every year on average die of taking aspirin, right? On aspirin. Where have you ever seen anything go wrong with aspirin? Where's that commercial? 3,000 a year. The benzo community loses a handful of people every year, right? A handful. It's not 3,000, I assure you. Now you might argue, well, those numbers aren't comparable. Well, they're closer than you think. I think there's an argument right now, especially with the pandemic, 70 to 200 million people on benzos. And you look at the number that are taking aspirin, that's close to that, right? So with this influx of people, you would expect to see, thousands of deaths related. You don't, right? So anyway, just to put that in perspective, I do understand, guys, that there's side effects, there's paradoxical effects, there's neurological damage. I get all of that. Again, though, is there an alternate explanation to this? So going further into Foster's tale here, he pretty much presents that in just my interpretation of what he's saying, he's listing a lot about tests and all of this. I've never spoken to the guy, but I can say there's a little bit of smoke there, and I start to wonder, does this person deal with health anxiety? I'm just curious, because whenever I hear about that many tests being done and these type of invasive tests, and then the associations where, it must be neurological, and it's bend, and bend doesn't play well with COVID, and well, sure, you know what else doesn't play well with COVID? COVID doesn't play well with COVID. Getting COVID 3 times can change and inflame the brain. I mean, I had several friends that developed COVID, had COVID, long COVID symptoms, post-COVID symptoms, and they were having very similar things. Can't swallow, which, by the way, that swallowing issue, it's not neurological. It's completely a psychological. Well, I shouldn't say it completely, but it's predominantly a psychological, a kind of somatoform disorder. It's psychological, guys. I've helped people. I've treated people with this thing, and I've watched them recover. But what ends up happening is, if you don't, really treat the larger problem there, which is rumination and the implications of how the brain, the limbic system, starts to attack the body in certain ways, right? So this isn't like, when I say psychological, I don't mean it's in your head and you're making this up. What I'm saying is your nervous system is displacing these type of symptoms. They're triangulating them into the body. And it could be things like pelvic floor. It can be stomach issues. And all this stuff is real stuff on its own. But when it's related to anxiety and benzos, the dynamic shifts. Everything changes there. Now, is it really severe IBS coming from, insert one of 100 different type of stomach disorders, or is it from the anxiety? Is it really something wrong with your throat and you can't swallow, or has it become a psychosomatic issue, a somatoform, where now you've exhausted the muscles in your throat because you're trying to swallow all day, and now your throat's become inflamed and you're having some reflux issues and you're becoming very obsessive, like OCD on your throat issues. And this is creating a rise in panic. Well, look, if you go to, I think, even Wikipedia, and you research side effects of anxiety, the feeling of not being able to breathe, the closing of the throat. I mean, this is well documented for over 100 years, right? Not exclusive to benzos at all, guys. So again, looking at all of this, just what I say, all of this, it's not like he shared a ton here, to be fair. And I'm not trying to discredit the guy or pick on the guy or any of that. So please hear me. But I do think it's important to provide some other explanations and say, okay, I'll put on the table what he's saying, that he thinks that it's a setback after several years, and that it's a mixture of COVID and bind, whatever bind is completely. I think, again, I've had a video on that. I think that's the most, I'm very on the fence with that term, because I see it grossly being overused and misused and being used in a way that sort of enables people to, not enables, but disarms them in the sense of being able to have faith in the recovery and be active and engaged in the recovery, right? That's a whole nother story we can talk, but I mean, this is the nature of the beast here. But I do want to just provide other explanations. I think that's fair. Let's all put on our scientific little hats and let's look at this thing rationally and say, okay, so on the table, I hear he might be right. Maybe it is a neurological post-benzo situation. Maybe it is partly COVID. Maybe it is a setback after several years. Personally, I've never really seen a setback, after a meaningful amount of time, a couple years, let's say, that I was convinced 100% wasn't something else. I just haven't seen it. And I know you go, well, there's stories that I've heard in the forums, Dave. Well, guys, I listen to those forums. I've been in all those forums. I've had some of those people, some of the louder voices you hear in those forums, moderators and people, even coaches have reached out to me. Right? Now, I can't share any of that because it's private, but I can tell you coaches have reached out to me, and a lot of these louder voices, bigger personalities in benzo communities I've had conversations with, and when you dive deeper into their stories, there's more there than what's often reported. For whatever reason, maybe they don't see it. I'm not saying that they're trying to trick anyone or anything like that, but I don't think we see it. I think we get tunnel vision. It's health anxiety, right? Like, try to convince someone with health anxiety that it's health anxiety. It's the hardest thing to do. When I was having palpitations, I went to the hospital 3 times by ambulance, guys, convinced I was having a heart problem. Even years after benzos, I was convinced I must have something wrong with my heart. I was so scared I didn't even want to get my heart rate up. I dealt with POTS syndrome. It must be something, right? Like, you don't want to hear it. Another client that thinks it's thyroid. Another client thinks it's pelvic floor. It's cancer. It's stomach. It's brain. It's, we latch on to these things. It's muscle twitches. It must be ALS or MS or, it's hard to wrap our head around that anxiety and stress can do such crazy, wonky things to the body. And once you've been through benzo withdrawal, man, you've got like PTSD. Why the hell would you not override the common sense or the more rational answer and go right to the worst case scenario? That's what your brain has been doing for years. That is the big river, the big road going from the limbic system out, from benzo out to the trigger. That's what it has been doing. It has been going from 1 to 100 in a split second. Is this a heart palpitation from a little too much caffeine or just a little anxiety? No, it must be a clogged artery. There must be something bigger going on here, right? This is just what it does, guys. But if you understand it, you can work with it. You can beat it. You can retrain your brain. And that's my big message here. It's not about being right. It's not like I go around and I'm a contrarian and I want to be argumentative or something. I see something and I say, if they're right, then there's really not much you can do. But if they're wrong, there's a lot you can do. And it would be a damn travesty to see someone stuck. And I've seen it 1,000 times, guys, where someone believes they're stuck and there's nothing they can do. And I examine the situation and I'm seeing a lot of maladaptive stuff. I'm seeing a lot of trigger reinforcement. I'm seeing a loop playing on in their head over and over again for years. And once I can finally help them to sort of put on a new record, to do some things differently, lo and behold, these symptoms start to diminish and they start to get their life back. That's a fact. It's a fact. And that's why I may seem cocky or arrogant or, wow, he's really damn sure. Yeah, because I've run the experiment 1,000 times, right? And I've done their experiment. I've run their math, and I get their math, but I don't think they get my math. It's like I am confident that I could frame this in a way that I could take their argument and preach it for them in a way that they would go, he gets it. But I'm not confident that they could do that for my argument. I think there would be some butchering there and some misinterpretation. Anyway, I want to finish up on this, but excuse me, got some allergies dealing with today. Not a high pollen here in Florida. Again, COVID 3 times, the inflammation on the brain, the stress, the impact of what COVID has been known to cause, anxiety, depression, the trauma response, the health anxiety, the somatoform sort of disorders that are emerging with the swallowing and the air hunger and the stomach issues, the fact that you're a benzo coach or you're doing all this content is tough, guys. If you're someone who's listening to this and you have a channel or you are a coach, You have to know as you're healing, this is not the best thing. I mean, in fact, I came back 4 years, 5 years after I was removed from benzos, and I thought I was in great shape. And this stuff was like digging open an old wound. I mean, my stress level, and to this day, I'm still having to monitor my interactions with this stuff, how much. And I'm a full-time benzo coach. I'm doing all kinds of stuff in this community, but I get burned out. I can feel my stress levels. I can feel that hyperarousal. I do believe benzos leave us a little bit more sensitive, right? I think that's a fair argument. Coming off of benzos, maybe for years, I don't know. I don't want to say for life. I hope not. But just think that maybe our limbic system is a little more fragile than the average person, possibly. On the other hand, maybe it's trauma response, because I've had clients that came back and they were jumping out of airplanes and going bungee jumping and riding roller coasters and, doing all kinds of amazing things. And many people would look at them and say, wow, your limbic system must be made of steel, until they have a health trigger. And then boom, the whole cards come down. Then it's suddenly reframed as it's bend. Then it's a benzo setback. Think about that. I mean, how can you have both? Right? Their argument doesn't start to add up. Well, I have a severe neurological disorder, but one that allows my limbic system to be stronger than other people. But, so sometimes it doesn't add up that way. And maybe you're listening and saying, well, that's not my case. I'm not saying it is. I understand, but I'm saying you could build it up. You could keep winning, keep fighting, keep retraining your limbic system and get to a place where you're like, wow, I used to have fear flying. I fly now. I enjoy it. I used to have trouble talking in front of an audience. I can talk in front of an audience now. I used to not be able to drive. Even before benzos, I had anxiety driving on busy highways. Now I drive on busy highways. I do great, right? Like, you can train your limbic system. You guys hear me talk a lot about the bridge analogy, where you can have a panic attack on a bridge because you get a phone call that someone you loved was in a fatal accident or near fatal accident, and you have a panic attack and you pull over and you hyperventilate and oh my God, and you whip the car in a U-turn and you rush back off the bridge into the hospital to go see your loved one. And then for the rest of your life, you could potentially have a phobia of bridges, right? Because the bridge didn't do it, but that's what your limbic remembers. Something bad, something very, very, very traumatizing happened right here on this bridge. And I'm never going to let you forget it. Not unless you can train me or teach me that this bridge wasn't a problem. I won't let my guard down. That's what it does. On the other hand, you could take something as heavy as, or I should say neurologically hardwired into the limbic system by evolution, such as the fear of grizzly bears, the fear of crocodiles, the instinct to not swim out to a crocodile in neck deep of water and try to kiss it on the snout. But you can override your limbic system to the point where you can do that. You can be raised with a baby crocodile, sleep with him in your bed, pet him, come to love him, swim with him, tame him. And people, you can watch footage on YouTube of this. People swimming and playing with crocodiles like they're some kind of puppy. And if you hook them to some tests, no cortisol response, no adrenaline response, no increased heart rate. They're completely at peace with it as if they were playing with a puppy. Right? So that's my point, is the brain is adaptable. It's plastic. It can retrain. It can heal. It can adapt. And the limbic system is wildly adaptable in that regard, for better or worse. For better or worse. And that is the premise, if you want to say the premise of the emphasis of my response and my interpretation of Foster's video here and some of the things he's saying, is I think there may be something more going on with the limbic system. That's all. Again, might be wrong. Maybe it's COVID. Maybe, well, certainly I think COVID had a big piece to do with this as well. I'm not saying it's not that. But is it a setback or is it a flare-up? Ask yourselves that, guys. What's the difference? Are we going backwards or are we going up? Because what goes up comes back down, right? But it doesn't mean you're going backwards. And that's something I often try to challenge everybody on when we're talking about setbacks. What are we saying? And the idea of a setback is like, it's almost like your brain was a building that was being rebuilt after being destroyed, and you have this scaffolding system, and then you're building up 10 floors, and it's going great, and then oh no, boom, they come crashing back down, and we're back down to 2 floors again, right? And that's what I think what we think is happening. It's like, that's a setback. I'm building, and it's all erased. But instead, I think we should look at it, in most cases at least, as a flare-up, as a stress overload. Well, man, I have this hypervigilant nervous system. I have a stress disorder. I have health anxiety. I have a traumatized limbic system from the absolute hell that I endured going through benzo withdrawal. And now, when I get a little overstressed, be it 3 bouts of COVID, life stressors, health anxiety, whatever's going on, my hyperarousal system gets activated, which is sort of like, picture the hyperarousal system as a sort of a light foot resting on the gas pedal, right? It's not like you're revving it up, but it's increasing it. It's not idling, right? Normally we're at an idle in our sort of how our limbic system reacts to things. It's at a certain plateau, a level. And now imagine it just sort of revving up a bit and staying. The RPMs are going up a bit, and kind of use a car analogy, and it's sustaining. And that's the buzzing and the twitching and the tingling and the difficult breathing and the sleep and all of that stuff. That's a hyperarousal activity. And I suspect when you have these issues, that's largely what we're looking at, guys. That's a flare-up. Your stress your cortisol levels rise. You start to get overstressed. And here we go. GABA is, and I'm sure there's something there with GABA. I mean, if you deal with an anxiety issue, even having never taken benzos, chances are, there's something going on with GABA. Now, the chemical imbalance argument is starting to change drastically. We're looking at it not so much as chemical imbalance, because they've done studies and people did have normal levels of GABA or normal levels of serotonin, and yet they still were depressed or anxious. And they said, what was going on here? Well, part of it was that they had fewer synapses or fewer dendrites, fewer ability for the nerves to take in the existing GABA, right? So there was multiple things going on here. It wasn't just like a depletion, like a vitamin deficiency, I think it was sort of the psychiatric model. Oh, you have a vitamin deficiency. Not true. That's why ketamine infusions, for example, they don't introduce serotonin. It's not an SSRI, but what does it do? It actually grows synapses. It grows parts of the brain and actually reactivates dormant parts of the brain that allows for sort of a more efficient processing of the serotonin and GABA that's there. It actually increases GABA receptors as well. That's pretty incredible. So anyway, I'm starting to get off topic here a little bit. There's so much to be said about this, but hopefully I've given you some things to think about. Hope some of this made sense. Again, I really don't want to come across like I'm picking on Foster. I applaud him for what he's doing. I'd love to talk to the guy, have him on my podcast, or be on his podcast, whatever. I think we could have some good conversations here. But I just want to provide just a second interpretation of some of this and say, setback or flare up, bend in all of this, or maybe a hyper stress response coupled with a lot of health anxiety and a lot of somatic symptoms going on right now. It's tough to say, guys, but the implication is big, because on one hand, if you think it's just bend, then there's nothing that can be done, right? I mean, that's what I've been told. If it's just a neurological disorder, it's like having Parkinson's or something. What do you do, right? On the other hand, if my suspicion's a little more correct, then I think there is stuff we can still do. I think there's a lot of rewiring, a lot of neuroplasticity, a lot of trauma recovery, and probably a lot of other things we can do to keep moving in the right direction and getting our hands on this. But my fear is, and this is why I do these kind of videos, is, man, I don't want to see you guys get trapped and, literally trapped, your leg caught in a trap that you can't get out of, because we have these associations now that we believe we have a benzo-induced, kind of brain damage, and there's really not much we can do. We just have to wait it out and try to de-stress, and I think that's tragic, right? That's just tragic.